Good afternoon, everybody. It's Wednesday, the 14th of December. Today we have Yanik with us. I'm not going to do any introduction because you've read his stuff and you've had him here before, and he participates quite frequently on our Lunch and Learns at Neuro at Night. But today he is going to be talking about, intermittent fasting. His title is The Fasting and Feasting Dance. And Yanik, thanks so much for taking the time. I know this takes time to prepare these, and we appreciate that you're taking your time to work with us and present this material. So it's all yours.
Thank you, Rob. Yes, well, then I'll just go ahead because this is a topic which is very interesting, a lot easier to do than we think, and it's very much worth it because when we're talking about brain function, energy, well, this is something that no food and no supplement can do. And the great thing about it is that it's free. So I hope everyone enjoys it. So I'll just get started and I'll take some questions at the end. Okay, so I named it the Fasting and Feasting Dance. So why did I name it that way? It's because it has to do with rhythms, circadian rhythms, the daily rhythm, the body rhythm, hormones, all these, they have to be in tone with a certain sequence. And all this comes from our environment. Now, during our recent times, it's just we've been taught to be eating and eating and eating, right? Just feasting and feasting and feasting. But we're not really fasting or not eating. So it's as important to eat as it is to not to eat. So this is just an explanation of the timelines of my program. And there's a reason I added to the 5th session, which is mostly for adults. Fasting is really not something that kids should be trying out because children and teenagers are really still growing, they're developing their brains, and they don't really have to access these types of metabolic passageways, which are mostly focused on our regeneration. So this has a lot more to do with the when than what we are eating. So when we talk about intermittent fasting, it's actually been researched and studied as time restricted eating. So what it means is you've got this window of time between when you eat something and when you stop eating it. It's that simple. It's not, we've just lost that habit of understanding, okay, there's a certain time when we can eat things and certain times when we should not be eating things. Now, why should we fast? Well, it's pretty much has to do, the basics is energy. So there are different types of fast. It goes from less time to more time, and there are different modalities. But in the beginning, what we're looking for is just a shift in energy. So when we do that, and with more time, we get regeneration. And if you add all of that up on the long term, you get more longevity. So you increase your function and you also increase your lifespan. There are 3 things that have been found very consistently to increase your life. One is having your micronutrients to transform all of your food, your body, so you can function, so you can build yourself. Sleep, so you can regenerate, you can build up all that energy, and fasting. And so this is like the triad of the components that you need to really have a longer life and for it to be more sustainable. Now, it really starts with the power plants. The mitochondria in our cells are those power plants that fuel, that give the energy so our cells can work, so they can build themselves, this includes neurons, of course, right? Detoxing mechanisms, everything. So there are different pathways that start being activated depending on the nutrients that you have. So these are just three important signaling systems, which is insulin, which almost everybody knows, but this one is much more recent. mTOR, which is the mechanistic target of ripamycin, which is, it's a nutrient sensor depending on, it focuses more on amino acids to rebuild, and AMPK. So this is just gonna check out, hey, what are your energy levels? And depending on this, it's the energy source that we will, that the cells are gonna use as fuel for your body. So what is fasting? Well, it's pretty much just a controlled and voluntary way to abstain from eating to receive the benefits. It's different from the typical starvation where you don't have an option, you don't have access to food, you don't have access to micronutrients, you start breaking down. People that do not have all these reserves should not be fasting. Now, is it dangerous? Well, no, in general, it isn't. If you have the resources, the body stock, all those reserves, nutrients, vitamins, minerals, you shouldn't have a problem. But it is bad for business, though, especially the food business, because instead of selling food, 6 times, you can only sell 3 times. So if profits go down, that's why it has been considered forbidden and so dangerous, as opposed to our, religious practices or non-religious spiritual practices going back thousands of years. Well, that's pretty much the track record it has of usefulness to our society. And also, well, you'd not only stop using so much money to buy food, but you start having savings. So it's pretty much the oldest dietary strategy. Why is it so? Well, because it's free, it's so easy to do. It is a stressor though. So whenever you fast, you really want to take it easy. You can maintain yourself occupied, but in general, it is a stressor. So the cool thing about fasting is you can choose when to fast and when not to fast. So it's like, oh, you know what? There's a lot. I have a much higher workload these days, so I'd rather fast another day. So you can do that. It's fine. It's perfect. So it has a lot of versatility. There's flexibility, so you can choose whenever you want to do it. So there's this idea, since we have a certain level of abundance, food all around, that we can always eat, but that is not really the general norm. It's, scarcity has been the norm. So that's why we've integrated into our culture, civilizations, religions, this like fasting and feasting dance. When it starts getting colder, we start feasting a lot more, which is actually, when we start increasing our insulin levels and getting a lot more fat accumulation, which isn't really bad. It's just something we have evolved and adapted to, our body is, it's what it does because there isn't food all the time. So it gets colder, you get more fat, you've got the insulation, a little bit more temperature control and insulation from the cold, stabler energy levels from switching between glucose, glycogen, which is, like the liver starch, and fat. But this is the traditional intermittent fasting 12-hour fast, which just means eat 12 hours, don't eat 12 hours, with no snacks in between. Nothing right here, nothing right here, So you need to let the fat go as well. It needs to transform so you can maintain yourself stable. This is 1977, by the way, the typical eating pattern. Now you can just see the switch. Now 2003, 6 meals a day and a very small window of time for fasting, as in not eating. So you just have these peaks and peaks and peaks, and that constantly will turn itself into fat accumulation. Now, when do we have the most weight gain? Well, it's pretty much at the year's end. So we're pretty much there, huh? We're halfway through December. So that's where you start really accumulating all that fat. And it also makes sense because it's colder, so you need to eat a lot more so you can keep your body temperature. The thing is, it pretty much doesn't change much after that. So as opposed to before, when you would start fasting after the holidays. So at the same time, while you're stacking up all those extra pounds from all those, all that feasting from the holidays, well, you also start losing nutrients. So it's an inverse relationship. You need those nutrients to transform food. You eat too much food, and now we know the food is pretty much empty. Then you start having trouble, and you can't release the fat either. So intermittent fasting or time-restricted feeding, it has a very powerful effect on the circadian clock, which is the daily rhythm. You know, you're waking up, you sleep at a certain time, you get hungry at a certain time, has a strong impact on aging, on autophagy or autophagy. It really does depend. So many people say it in a different way, but it pretty much just means that your body starts eating up old components, also all the debris, and it creates new ones. So I added this, the gut-brain axis, right? Because when we're talking about fasting, there is no way we can avoid talking about the microbiome. So the microbiome is, it's the population of bacteria and fungi, yeast, and all these that are in our intestines. So they pretty much digest everything we've eaten, and then our enteric cells, or our intestines, take that up and we use it. So it's very common right now with all the type of starches, the sweets, the coloring types of food, that we start having this dysbiosis, which is you get a lot more of one type of bacteria, and its byproducts start affecting your intestines, and you get leaky gut. You get leaky gut, it starts going into your blood, you start getting inflammation all over the place. That includes your brain. So fasting is one of those ways to start balancing out not just glucose levels, energy levels. It also has a very strong impact on your gut microbiome. Now, there are different forms of fasting, which I will get into in the next slides. So when you fast, you start noticing that you get like this hunger hormone, right? Well, the hunger, which comes from a hormone called Ghrelin, but it comes in waves. It isn't like, oh my God, if I'm so hungry in 6 hours, then I'm gonna be starving in 24 hours or 36 hours. It's actually the contrary. It reaches a peak and then it starts going down. So when you're conscious of this, you can take a tea, certain types of, teas are very useful for this because you just let that wave pass and then the hunger subsides. It doesn't increase. It's not like I haven't eaten for 5 days and it's going to be 5 times more difficult. It's actually going to be easier the more time that passes. Now, hunger also comes in waves, which is the circadian rhythm. So between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., it's pretty much those peaks where you get hungrier. And when you understand this, then you can follow those natural rhythms without having dinner too late, like 10 p.m., for example, which does affect the body. And that way you've got this 12-hour window, which 12 hours is just the minimum. To tell you the truth, it's just like a it's it's a time where you can like have as a reference, as a starting point, and then you can move up to a 10-hour window eating, or 8 hours, or just things like that. But it's very versatile. Now, not all foods will give you the same sensation of fullness, right? Satiety. So this is just an example of how much you want to eat after eating certain types of food, like eggs or turkey or tuna or whey. So whey protein is very effective in cleansing, well, quenching your hunger. So that's where different strategies like meal replacement and types of proteins and foods are very useful. It's not a calorie thing. Calorie counts are very, useless at this point. I think even the most functional doctors don't even use it anymore. But this is just one example of how important it is to understand which types of foods we can use in combination when we do eat. So when we fast, we don't eat. And when we do eat, we want these nutritious, satiating types of foods. Now, it's just some basic hunger suppressors like water, or carbonated water. Green tea is very useful. Fats, like the bulletproof coffee. I personally don't use coffee, don't recommend it at all, but I do recommend green tea or matcha green tea with these combinations, or cinnamon. So when you learn about these, you just don't get as hungry anymore. And you can use those during your fast without breaking the fast and having most of the benefits. So one of the issues as to why we have been eating for so long with this window has this extended window has to do with artificial lighting. So before we would just, people would burn wood and then that would provide heat, but there weren't so many ways to be storing food. And also the ashes would be thrown into the garden where you were growing part of your vegetables, and the vegetables would take up those minerals. So now we don't have that. We've got the refrigerator, the electricity, so we always have the action to go and snack or grab some more food. So that those are some of the issues. Now, well, part of the facing opposition is, big food, big pharma, big sports. I've talked about big sports and the sporting industry of how it benefits from all of this. And we're going to go a little bit more into how the eat less and move more is really not a useful method. But it does provide, a lot of sales. So when you've got these multi-million-dollar industries, well, you can't be that objective anymore. So what does the body value as the most important energy source? Well, you can just see it through this. In conversion, fat in the body that is stored is pretty much 40,000 calories, as opposed to glucose, which is 2,000 calories. So what you do when you fast is that you start having metabolic flexibility. That means that you can start switching from glucose to fat to glucose, and you are a lot more resilient, more stable. That'll translate into constant energy, as well as more mental clarity, brain function, and emotional stability. So glucose would be, and glycogen would be pretty much the example of this refrigerator, right? It's a short-term thing. It won't last long. But when we talk about body fat, it's like having these big freezers, and this is where you really need this to be able to survive. The thing is, we never stop eating now. So, um, so we really are not letting out, you know, what it our the way our body was originally designed to liberate that fat and energy for times of scarcity. So there are different metabolic phases, which is pretty much, okay, we feed, we get higher glucose levels, glycogen, and the excess is stored after glycogen in fat, right? So between 6 to 24 hours, 36 hours, you get lower glycogen stores. Then you start producing more glucose derived from amino acids and excess connective tissue. So this is really key and really important because all that excess skin you have, I don't know if if people here have seen that people drop a lot of pounds and then they get this like hanging skin and they just then they need surgery. Well, with fasting, that does not happen because your body eats up all the, all that excessive skin, connective tissue, and your joints, your arteries, and it uses it. So that's one of the major benefits. For that, you need more than 2 days fast. But in either case, it's just using up, the body knows how to use everything that it has, just so it can create new tissue, new structure. After 2-3 days, you enter this ketogenic state, ketosis, which is pretty much you're burning more fat. And you're using fatty acids to energize, to fuel most of your tissues, but you're also using ketones, especially for the brain, and some glucose. But you don't need a lot of glucose for the brain. There's even this case where a person fasted for 382 days. So yeah, that's more than a year. He did have to take his multivitamins and minerals and everything, but other than that, it's not just possible, it is sustainable. Now, after 5 days, your body will start breaking down some muscle and proteins, so it can continue rebuilding the most important organs and cells that require, that are required for you to function, which you gain back after you start eating in about a week. So you don't just like burn up your muscle. So you pretty much start up with these high carbohydrates, goes down, fat and ketones start being the most important energy sources, and you get glucose from there. So it's not dangerous in that aspect. Now, an important focus here is there are certain types of, proteins that are very useful for the brain, which is BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or NGF, nerve growth factor, which is pretty much, it helps you with memory, neurons, nerves, so it can not just protect the ones that you have, but it also helps in creating new ones from new stem cells. So when that increases drastically is during fasting. It's one of the best ways to do this. It encourages neurogenesis and protection of everything that's new. So fasting is also not just a useful tool to maintain your infrastructure and your brain and everything. It's really also to produce new types of neurons, specification and everything. And it works a lot in the hippocampus. For example, nerve growth factor, you get more of that through weightlifting. I do not recommend HIIT training, for example, because of the strong impact it has on arteries and the heart. However, through fasting, it's a different story. So that's a much easier and safer way to get these high levels and for your body to use them. The brain also switches to, use about like 75% ketone bodies and 25% glucose. So it is quite sustainable. This has been acknowledged as well as in the diabetic, American Diabetic Association, and all these old ideas that to not eat cholesterol and everything. It's been there for about 7 years. No recommendation to limitation or anything of the sort. So things are changing a lot, and fat isn't being viewed as, just like the villain of the story, but it's a very important aspect also for long-term, as in maintenance, rejuvenation, going against dementia, Alzheimer's, all these different um, neurological deficiency-based diseases. And not just deficiency, but also by not understanding cycles and rhythms, right? So, we've got all these recommendations from the government since 1970. Things just keep on getting worse, so it's clearly not working. Eating more vegetables. I mean, which type of vegetables, which types of fruits, which types of grains? I mean, it's not all the same, right? Eat less eggs, eat less animal fats, and well, health is going in the opposite direction. Now, this is a comparison between, longevity from fasting, and which is not really just calorie restriction, right? It has more to do with certain amino acid type of restrictions and other aspects as well. So longevity is really increased through fasting. And we've seen this in biomarkers and in anecdotal observational studies, in really poor societies, but they are full in minerals and other types of nutrients. So it's really interesting. That would be topic for another presentation. In either case, fasting in animals as well as in humans has shown to have increased markers in, just not functional, but longevity type of markers. Now, the Let's Move More initiative, which has been quite a failure. This has been studied in 7-year studies in women. There have been studies with different countries, Americans being the ones that exercise the most, as opposed to the Dutch and Italians. However, there is a lot less obesity in those countries where there is a lot less physical activity. So even in the UK, you've got an increase from 32% to 39% in men, but obesity continues increasing as well as in women. So you can just see how that's not the way, right? Personal experience as well. I usually, thinking calorie-wise, I increase calories through protein and fats, and people just stop losing weight and they drop in weight. So they don't even have to do any type of exercise. It can be very useful, different types, but you have to know when and how to do it. In either case, all these studies, they're pretty much saying the same thing. We also have this, the information during World War II where the soldiers didn't have the rations for sugar. It just had to be removed, and they used butter instead. And you could just see how their metabolism changed, their diabetes mortality, all of it changed to an extent where, they just, they stopped having the issue. They just closed the intake of sugar and certain, simple types of sugars, and it all changed. And butter, which was all, criminalized as being like very dangerous and everything, thanks to Procter and Gamble, um, well, it actually has the opposite effect in metabolism. So this is just, an extra of understanding, okay, well, you've got your triglycerides, which is, it has these different components, which have everything you need so you can fuel your heart, kidneys, brain, everything, and you don't shut down. So that's how you know it's not dangerous. In either case, you do need the metabolic components, cofactors, as in nutrients, vitamins, etc., to transform fat into energy, into ketones, into these fatty acids. That's why I do not recommend fasting if you are malnourished. Now, there's the most important and more interesting part of fasting when we're talking about prolonged fasting is that there's this process called apoptosis where the cell will pretty much, check its different levels functioning, and it'll be able to renew itself. It'll program its own death, or it'll eat certain components of the cell that are not really working that well. At 18 hours time, you get mitophagy, which the cells start eating the mitochondria and producing new mitochondria. So the way I explain this is, okay, you can take all the supplements in the world you want, you can eat all you want, but if your mitochondria are not functioning as well, they're kind of damaged and they're working at an 80% capacity, supplements will probably take to that 80%. But when you fast and cells eat themselves up and the mitochondria, then you produce a new mitochondria with 100% capacity. Now you use supplements with that and you've got a much higher yield and energy. So the cell can work, because work requires energy. So autophagy or autophagy is pretty much, cells eating up old components and creating new ones. So it is the ultimate recycling, increase in function that we can look for. Only 3 grams of certain amino acids like leucine, isoleucine, methionine can stop the autophagy process, and the body will form into building using external sources. That's why fasting mimicking diets or eating certain amounts of foods in a certain time will give you much more benefits than just like the 12-hour restricted eating or the 24-hour fasts. So which types of organisms benefit? Well, we've seen this in bacteria, in yeast, and worms, and mice. It's just abundance is not the norm. It has never been. The environment changes a lot. Scarcity is more of the norm. So maintaining these ancient pathways so we can respond and build up whenever we do eat again is it's just critical for our survival. So the fasting mimicking diet is pretty much eating very low amounts of certain types of foods throughout the day, which has more benefits than just a water fast. A water fast can promote the tight junctions to come down, to break apart, for you to get leaky gut, as opposed to providing certain foods for your microbiota, which will reproduce certain types of, which bacteria do you want? Do you want gram negative, gram positive, so you can rebuild your gut. So that's why I opt for fasting mimicking diets and design some of them so you can continue eating certain amounts and benefit and fortify that gut-brain connection. This is also an example of how pancreatic islets are regenerated, because also when you're not eating, there's less pressure to produce insulin, there's less pressure on your pancreas to produce all those enzymes to break down proteins, and those enzymes actually go into your body and they break down, excessive connective tissue, and this also includes cancer cells. So it really does depend how many times, it depends on your body weight, how many times you can carry out each type of fast. 12-hour fast, not complicated, not at all. 24-hour fast, you can do it a few times a week, for example. 48-hour fast, 72-hour fast, clients have been able to do it. They drop a lot of weight, but always supplemented. And the fasting mimicking diet, which is 5 days, it isn't that easy though. It isn't a walk in the park, but it isn't the worst thing out there. So it's like between 1 and 4 times a year, which in this case, for example, it's very useful when we finish up the cold season to start with, to really start with this fasting, so we burn up all that excessive fat and we replenish ourselves, we regenerate. This is also an example of fasting in self-reported chemotherapy symptoms, and you can just notice the difference between the side effects, tiredness, feeling weakness, hair loss, headache, nausea, vomiting. It just changes because your body also activates these detoxing mechanisms, so it can get rid of the waste. So instead of using so much energy to produce, it uses its energy to recycle, to get rid of waste. And just like the Japanese, they depend on external sources and they're really good at it. They're really efficient. So so our body is way better than they are. Every single body has this capacity, and we just have to tap into it. Now, blood stem cells, they increase by a lot. So if you were to listen to functional neurology doctors, they'd say, well, it's not clinically significant, and that would be true in a short term. But if we're talking about longer terms, as in, okay, so you've been doing this for a year or for years and it's just a common practice, that does build up.
Yanik, you're at about a quarter till, just so you know.
Okay, thank you, Rob.
You're
Almost
welcome.
done here. So there's also the low protein intake, different types of proteins, especially animal proteins, do have a relationship with mortality below a certain age, and also cancer cells. Research, when drilling down, has really led more towards the towards understanding that the way that you cook food has much more impact on cancer, and also knowing that we did not have access to so much protein constantly. So eating so much, even carnivore diets, not that healthy if you eat too much of it and too frequently. The same way, going to the other extreme, vegan diets, right? So there is a certain rhythm, cycles that which you can really use. There's also a gender difference. Women have to preserve more fat than men do because their body requires a certain level in case reproduction is needed for the survival of the species. So for women, it's more important to do it more sporadically and also to really be listening a lot more to your body. Well, starting like, one day try it out, the other day don't try it out, and see how you feel, because men are more equipped for this. Women aren't. It's just, it's biology, So, so they can benefit as well. Women can benefit, of course, because scarcity is both in women and in men. But it's just being a little bit more cautious, and mostly if you're underweight, which is not a good place to start. So who shouldn't fast? Pretty much malnourished people, especially with micronutrient starvation, which I call invisible starvation. Pregnant women, infants, and young children, they need to be building, not to be really recycling. Now, their body is doing that either way, right? If you have low body fat, don't go for it. Maybe just a 24-hour fast or 36 hours, not more than that. Endurance athletes, peak performance, being very careful with that. Being on medication, like metformin or insulin. Food insecure people, dieters, smokers, those people should not be fasting. Now, this is an example of one of the presentations from Dr. Suter regarding, slow waves, as in delta, theta, and these are people that'll probably benefit the most from fasting. So you get a lot of reduction in immune function. Immune reactivity. The debris in your brain goes down, the energy goes up, and it's very important because just by understanding that, you've got more clearance, you've got detox, and you've got more energy. That's just basics. Oh, also another aspect to this is that you've got a high metabolic score. Well, those are great candidates, but if they have a high BMI, higher weight, not a low weight. If they're low weight, it's not a good option. Now, what's the best way to fast? It's, in a cyclical way. It's just like a dance. So eating low quantities of certain foods, breaking the fast, and entering the fast once and again. That's the best way and the safest way. Now, the amount of time depends on how much body weight you have. And, we also need to eat the nutritious food and take all those minerals, vitamins, fatty acids, because you've got the new neurons, but you need to sustain them. And you can only do that with certain foods and rest, sleeping. Myelination is favored by eating nutritious foods. You're not going to get that through fasting. So all these are different aspects which are very important. And just understanding that every new cell will increase energy output. So that's it. That's it, Rob. You can open the floor for any questions.
Okay. Yep. We'll have Richard or Aaron will do that in a moment, and
Okay.
and we'll go from there.
All right.
Powerful program. I'm just curious about taking vitamins during fasting.
Oh, well, yeah, there's really no issue to taking vitamins during fasting, especially if you eat low amounts of foods, right? Or certain minerals. What I would not do, for example, is not taking certain types of amino acids or proteins. I wouldn't do that. For example, glutamine, right? You've got glutamine and it will increase your glucose levels. It can transform it. And so that's just like one example. And if you want to have that apoptosis, eating up the old parts of your body and stuff, well, you don't want most amino acids there, as in proteins, but not vitamins. That really wouldn't be an issue. Actually, vitamin C would speed up the process. Green tea speeds up the process as well.
Yanik, I was getting the impression that you like longer fasts, and skipping breakfast wasn't that meaningful for you?
Well, you can't do it like forever, right? That's why I like mention it as a rhythm, like a dance, because I've done the 5-day fast several times. I've also done 24, 36, 48, and as well as different clients. So I tell them, hey, just don't go overboard. I know you want to lose weight and everything, but first aspect is health, and you know, breakfast is really just when you break the fast. So it's not like it depends on the hour. So if you don't do it for one day, if you fast from 8 o'clock p.m. from one dinner to the other, well, then you're breaking the fast at 8 p.m. the next day. But that won't be an issue if you do it, sometimes or once in a while. It should not be an issue because you've got reserves. So you've got glycogen from your liver and you can continue working. There's no issue with that. But if you start doing that every day, then you will start training. So it's more of a cyclical type of thing. I hope that answered your question, or if not, just elaborate a little more and I'll just dig in.
Thank you.
I'm curious if you give any advice for seniors who are kind of concerned with muscle mass getting lower, or energy, I don't know, anything about seniors, people that are in their 70s, especially. Any thoughts about how this might be different for them?
Okay, so when people are above 65 years old, approximately, they do have this anabolic resistance. They need more protein. So they can have different types of fasts. Like, for example, they can have more of a protein type of fast with whey protein and bone broth and things like that. Or when they break the fast, they break it with whey protein. And that way they don't have that, sarcopenia, muscle loss, and everything else. They actually can eat a lot more protein than younger people without most of those effects that are sometimes not as desirable for younger people. So it does depend on the age, yes.
Yanik, are you saying that fasting is a weight loss strategy?
Oh, it definitely is. I mean, there's just no way around that one, right? So you need to have an energy source and you're going to use it up. So it is a very useful weight losing strategy, mostly for fat, accumulated fat. But you need more time for that. So it's better to have like these 24-hour fasts, like maybe once a week, 2 times a week, as opposed to having 70%, 30% caloric restriction, the typical dietitian would recommend. There's a lot more benefits to that than eating less every day, certain types of foods just based on calories. So yeah, you lose more weight, brain function goes up, energy goes up, hormones goes up, not while you're fasting, but after that, like 2-3 days after that. So yeah, it is weight losing really useful for that.
My impression was that fasting, you get some short-term weight loss, but you really get it back, and that it's an overall, there's no weight loss with intermittent fasting.
Well, if we're talking about TRE, time restricted eating, or what is mostly called intermittent fasting, then it's not too much. Yeah, you may not even have enough. And if you don't have enough nutrients, burn that fat, right? But part of what you lose is water the first days. So you'll gain part of it back. Part of it will not be water. If we're talking about a 5-day fast, it will not be water. It will be fat. So something that I use here before and after those fasts are, the measurements of body composition, and you can just see it before, after, weeks after that, right? So it's just as important to know what to eat when you eat again when you feast as important as it is to fast. So types of food, critical and important.
Okay.
Other questions, folks, for Yanik?
I'm just curious about, this is a little esoteric, but LDL versus HDL cholesterol. I've heard Mark Hyman talk about it, saying we have a 1960s way of looking at HDL and LDL cholesterol, but does that cholesterol level get affected by fasting?
Yeah, it's reduced, which is not something very desirable in my point of view, because a lot of studies are showing higher LDL, just in broad terms, is less mortality. But in either case, it does go down. Triglycerides go down. That's why you've got the glycerol chain. What I mentioned before, that's your energy source. It's going to break down into fatty acids, ketones, and glucose. So it will definitely go down. Triglycerides are the first ones to go down, and besides, stem cells are mostly stored in the fat. So you want to break them free so they can, be programmed into a neuron, or, just create those new cells. So that does change. There's a lot of studies on that, actually. Only that most of the studies are actually for males, as opposed to females. Very few studies, like about, 20% are in females. So it's important to understand that there are differences between genders, but those levels usually go down. Liver also, fatty liver goes, it's a general detox regeneration method. So it's free. You can do it whenever you want. You try it out. You don't like it, but the more you do it, the easier it becomes, and the less you become hungry. That's the most important. It sounds kind of paradoxical. The less you eat during those states, your munchies go down. You're less hungry. When you start eating again, it's like, oh, I have to eat again. Oh yeah, that's right. So it is very useful for hunger as well. But yeah, LDL goes down, triglycerides go down, C-reactive protein goes down, all those inflammation markers.
Well, thanks. This has been really encouraging, and I so appreciate the timing of this. I went to the doctor yesterday, and I'm 10 pounds more than I used to be, and I thought I was fat 10 pounds ago, but this is perfect timing for me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any last questions, folks? We're at the top of the hour. All right. Well, Yanik, great presentation. Lots of great material. So, folks, it will be posted. Aaron will probably shoot an email out on the listserv as soon as we post this webinar, because lots of things to go over again and listen to closely. Yanik, thank you again so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Great information, great guidance.
I'm glad it was useful. Thanks, Rob, Judy.
Sounds like a thumbs up all around, Yanik. Good
Excellent. Thanks, Richard.
All right, folks. We will see everybody here on Friday. We have a map next Monday. So no one has any, if you have a map for Friday or questions, shoot them to me right away. See everybody on Friday.
See you Friday. Thanks again.